Hi, everybody. It's Pastor Brent. Today, I just wanted to share some thoughts with you from 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul, who wrote 2 Corinthians, starts off by saying that, you know what, we all are recipients of God's kindness. And he's just talked about how God saved us from our sin. And that's a great kindness that God has to us. But then he goes on and he talks about that, yes, being saved from sin is one thing, but then he says, God is indeed ready to help you right now. And he goes on to talk about how they have been not just had life being good because okay, now we're saved and life is all good, but no, he goes on to talk about how they've, because they were Christians and they were trying to live lives that were so godly that they didn't impede the gospel in any way, that they had all kinds of hardships. He talks about being beaten and being put in jail with many sleepless nights, going hungry, all those kind of things, working to exhaustion. Yet through all those things, he said, God helped us. He said, we've done all these things through the power of the Holy Spirit, and God's power has been working in us. It seems to me that we as Christians, sometimes we really like the idea of salvation, that God has given us a new life, and that's all true. But what happens is oftentimes the new life brings us into real life where now God really wants to use us. And through using us, it's a little bit like being a grape. And a nice plump grape is a great thing. It's healthy and it's strong and it's pretty and it's good. But really, how it begins to be useful is when it gets squeezed and it begins to bring juice out, and that juice sometimes has to ferment to turn into wine, and that's really the value of grapes in a lot of ways. And in doing that, it's like God's power flows through us through the squeezing. That's when our identity comes out. And when the pressure's on us, that's when it shows what we're really made of inside. And because we learned a couple weeks ago that God's made us new creations, now when the pressure comes on, we can be like Paul. And Paul says, when in spite of that, we proved ourselves with our purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, our sincere love, and the power of the Holy Spirit. So when the pressure was on Paul and his companions, they still maintained their godly habits and they maintained a godly witness to people around them. And that was the point that Paul was making. Is like God sometimes gives us difficult circumstances, but he walks with us through them so that he can show his love and his power and his care to people around us. As we walk through hard things and we see and God helps us through that, then we can show how that can be done for other people. And it shows God's power and love flowing through us. And so as we get squeezed, and whether that be through hardship of maybe the COVID thing, the unrest that we see in our country, sometimes the health issues, and sometimes just the general anxiety of everything is kind of up in the air right now. And it's all kind of challenging for us to do. And so through this whole process, the question is, how do we respond? When we respond in our human strength, we don't always respond all that well. But when we trust God to help us to respond in a godly way and let his love and power flow through us, then we can have a positive influence to people around us. And that's what Paul is calling the Corinthians to do, is to accept God's kindness to them and then have them give that kindness to people around them. So as we don't just take that kindness and be like the grape and be all nice and plump and full, but we allow ourselves to be squeezed by life. And that's what really, in reality, what happens. Life sometimes squeezes us so that then we can let that flow through us so that God's love and all that kindness can flow out of us as we interact with other people, and people can see that in us. God doesn't leave us alone. He is indeed ready to help us right now, today, in whatever we're facing. And we can take great comfort in that. We know that God walks with us through the journey of life, and most of us have been through a lot of life already, and we can look back and say, yep, there were certainly times back there where I was squeezed, and it really wasn't pleasant. Paul doesn't say that those things were pleasant for him. In fact, he kind of says, no, they were really, really hard and they were difficult. But in spite of that, we persevered, and we can see God's hand who walked with us through that and gave us strength to persevere through those hard things. So we can take hope that God will walk with us. He will give us strength as we persevere through these hard things that we may be facing in life. And as we do persevere through that, we can show the people around us how to walk with God as well. So as we look around the people that are influencing us, our family members, our friends, we can show God's love and God's power and God's kindness to them because God was kind to us. And that's our challenge for this week. Be kind to others because God has been kind to us in spite of everything else that's going on around us. We can still love God and we can love people. And that's our challenge. Have a great week.